Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a guest today who I follow voraciously on social media because he is on top of law enforcement issues, not just locally where he lives in the Midwest, but nationally as well. And so I thought, who better to come on and explain some of the local issues, local changes, but also national trends in law enforcement when it comes to the prosecution and the persecution of the American law enforcement officer. Lieutenant Brian Steele, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Betsy.
So before we get into the nitty gritty stuff, I gotta ask you, why'd you become a cop?
Yeah, listen, great question. I had no intentions of being a police officer. I was raised with my grandparents. They were off the boat Scottish immigrants. They taught me a lot about the value of hard work, a lot of what values is, what it is to be an American. There's very people less patriotic than an immigrant to this country, and they came over. My grandfather's brother sponsored them, and they made a life for themselves. They started off as a slaughterhouse. My grandpa worked his way up, a deli, butcher by trade, butcher union, then owned a restaurant. I was going into the restaurant business. I went and did a tour in the Marine Corps because I believed in giving back to my country. I was going to run the restaurant business, and then 9/11 happened. Being from Northeast New Jersey deeply impacted me. And if you remember, there was a call to the police service, the fire service, and the military. I went and took my local fire test, my local police test. The old joke, the fire department wasn't hiring me, the police department did. And that's how I started my career in law enforcement 23 years ago.
You know, I got to ask you, both as a Marine and as a police officer, coming from the background that you did, what did it mean to you to take that oath to the Constitution that we all take?
Everything. I said I was raised loving this country, appreciating this country, and anybody who spends time overseas, you only love America more. This is the greatest country there is on this planet. Now, is there always room for improvement? Can we improve things? Absolutely. And that's what reform is. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about police reform because I use the word reform. Reform is not taking everything you did and throwing it out. It's taking what you have and making it better. I use the example of an iPhone. Steve Jobs came out with the greatest invention in the world. He didn't stop at the iPhone 1. He just found ways to make it better.
Absolutely. So let's get into what you're doing now. You are a lieutenant. You've been a working cop for 23 years. And now you're the union president. Brian, is it true that police unions exist solely to keep bad cops on the job?
Absolutely false, completely false. My job is I take one of these contracts, this 156-page contract. I protect the sanctity of the contract. When I took over as president, I made it clear. I said, I will hold elected officials accountable. I'll hold management accountable when they do wrong. I will praise them, support them when they do right. I said the same for myself and my members. If our members do something wrong, we will hold them accountable. I am not anti-discipline as long as it's fair, it's firm, and it's impartial, and it follows the just cause standard, which majority of times it do. You'll never hear a single word from me as a union president as long as you follow the due process that we bargained. Ohio is a very strong union state.
I was an Illinois cop and a fraternal order of police cop as well. And sometimes I made mistakes. Sometimes I opened my mouth when I shouldn't have. And so I got disciplined. We all make mistakes, don't we?
Sure. Sure. Listen, there's a mistake of the heart, mistake of the mind. If you make a mistake of the mind and you sit in front of me and ask me to defend you or to arbitrate your job, if it's a split-second decision, mistake of the mind, we'll help you out. If it's a mistake of the heart, if we had officers recently in Columbus that were working for the cartel, drug dealers, I took their FOP card and I put that in a shredder ceremoniously. You don't represent this union. You don't represent this badge.
But there's a real difference between a bad cop, a dirty cop, and a police officer who makes a mistake. We are making split-second decisions about life and death very often. And in Ohio, you guys just had a case that really is going to affect American law enforcement nationwide. Talk about that.
So you're referring to is Officer Coy shot and killed Mr. Andre Hill. It was December of 2020, just before Christmas. Andre Hill received a $10 million settlement from the city of Columbus. They named a law after Mr. Hill, and they also named a rec center. Let me start by being Mr. Clear. Andre Hill should be here today. I am so incredibly empathetic to his family for the loss. The onus is a little bit on Mr. Hill. Officer Coy, just to paint the picture, it's 1:30 in the morning. It's just before Christmas. It's in an area known for high burglaries. The officer arrived, approached Mr. Coy in a car, or approached Mr. Hill in a car. A neighbor called and said, there's a suspicious person sitting outside my house. An officer has a duty to go check on an individual. The individual wasn't listening to him, ignored him, got out of the car, started walking up to two different houses, knocking doors. Officer Coy still stood back, trying to figure out what's going on. The individual walked into a garage, an open garage. Officer Coy waited for his backup, told his backup what's going on. At this time, the individual is not committing a crime, but as you know, as a longtime cop, something is not right here. We have a duty to investigate this. The individual was told to come out of the garage. The backup officer pulled out her firearm. Officer Coy did not have his firearm until Mr. Hill quickly concealed one hand and raised another one up with a set of keys. Officer Coy yelled, gun, 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 stepped offline, fired 4 shots. At the time, we did not render aid. And that's something where reform actually helped the Division of Police. We didn't start rendering aid to after 2020. And it's kind of embarrassing now to say we stood there over a body and waited for the medics, right? We weren't medics. We've now changed that. We now provide aid. The reality is nothing was going to save Mr. Hill. He was shot in the heart. A thoracic surgeon right there with a team could not save him. This is the important part. Officer Coy made a split-second decision. Officer Coy made a mistake. He admitted he made a mistake. State versus Graham versus Connor and State versus White in Ohio case talk about we can make mistakes. He is not a murderer. He was charged with murder. He was convicted of murder. The jury got it wrong, and we're appealing.
In situations like that, well, first and foremost, let me say, you've been on the job for decades, so was I. No cop wakes up in the morning and thinks to themselves, I hope I can just shoot somebody today. It is one of the worst things that you can go through. Nobody wants to have to do it. And yet, like you said, we have this duty to investigate. We have a duty to confront. We have a duty to figure out what's happening in a situation like this. And in a dark garage in a high crime neighborhood, somebody raising up their hand in a shooting stance, which is something that we see in multiple police shootings a year, is a very difficult situation for a police officer. And one of the things we have seen in the last 10 years, but especially in the last 4 years, is hesitation by street cops when it comes to deadly force, haven't we?
Oh, we have. And you know what's going to do? It's going to get more people, more officers killed, or it's going to cause officers to sit back, to sit on their hands. Officers need to go out there and be proactive. They need to patrol those alleys at 2 in the morning, not sit behind a building and play Clash of Clans. But as a police leader, it's hard to tell these young officers they're wrong. Are we firemen? And no knock to my fire brothers, but dads and sisters, that's what we've become. We've become reactive. And what happened across the country? Crime went up, arrests went down. The Ferguson effect is a real thing. And it's been going on for at least almost the last decade now.
And, in a case like the Coy case, what do you believe leadership should have done? How should they responded? And what's going to change now if this case stands?
The first thing they should have done is not have been so vocal and commend the officer right off the bat. Almost every elected official in this town, in this county, they vilified the officer right off the bat. Didn't even give him a chance. I don't know how you get a fair trial in this city. I actually called for this to be moved to another county. And in this day and age, the jury is not supposed to know about the case. They're not supposed to talk to anybody. They're not supposed to look at your phone, social media. Betsy, it's almost impossible. These laws were written before technology. right? You and I are talking about things. We're going to get on a website on our phone in about 20 minutes, and something we talked about is going to pop up, right? An ad's going to pop up. That's just how it works. What we have to understand is we have to think about reasonable. What was reasonable? And remember, reasonable action might seem different to somebody facing an assailant than somebody analyzing, the question at leisure. These attorneys sit there and they take their time. 4 years it took this case to go through trial, to judge somebody who made a split-second decision thinking their life was in danger and their partners.
Do you think that because it was December of 2020, when we were still in the heat of the George Floyd riots and we had so much political discourse going on, did that add to this?
It did. We had a brand new prosecutor was elected that year. That prosecutor ran on the campaign of he was going to indict cops. He had said, and I quote, he said, I'm going to warn officers in the city, if you fall to the temptation of shooting someone, I will hold you accountable. Betsy, there's never a temptation to shoot someone, right? We respond to someone's aggression. And then, of course, 2020, the city of Columbus, we had our own riots here. They lasted 5 days. We had over 200 officers injured. After that, we brought in a DOJ investigation. We brought in a special prosecutor investigation. Ohio State University and a former U.S. attorney known as the Carter Report did an investigation. And what we found was 99% of the times our officers got it right.
What do you think the future of policing is, first for your agency and then even around the country, if we continue this trend of prosecuting cops for crimes when in reality, what happened is a mistake was made?
Easy. No one's going to take this job. No one's going to stay on this job. The city of Columbus, we hired 90 people this year. Elected officials boasted that's 90 boots on the ground. We lost 93. We're not keeping it up. When I came on post 9/11, there was lines out the door to take this job. I remember standing in a line to just for the opportunity to take a test. We're not hiring. Nobody's taking this job. Our guys are leaving. We have a deferred retirement program out here. It's a great program if you want to stay a little longer and make some extra money. When I first came on, everybody did it. Now, most people hit 25, they're out the door. They said, you know what, I'm going to do something else where I might not be charged with murder. As you know, Betsy, we'll die for our communities. Not a problem. We won't think twice. We'll run into that building. No, we're never coming home. We're not volunteering to go to prison for them, though.
About 250,000 people die each year from medical mistakes. And yet the American public is not, we're not protesting at hospitals. We're not putting doctors and nurses in prison. Why are cops expected to be perfect?
And no profession is perfect, and I'm glad you brought that up. A surgeon, I use split-second decision. A surgeon who has your chest crack open, that surgeon is trying to save you. If that surgeon makes a mistake, I like to say cuts the wrong wire, but we know there's no wires in there. It is not murder. If that surgeon shows up drunk, smoking crack, and does it, well, then hey, maybe that could be considered murder, right? But the cops are the same thing. You make a split-second decision. You absolutely should be held accountable if you make a mistake. Maybe held accountable is training. Maybe it's discipline. Maybe, you just weren't ready to be the police that day and go find another line of work, but not murder. It's making it harder to do this job. It's impacting retention and it's impacting recruiting.
Can you explain to people the difference between getting sued as a police officer for making a mistake and getting charged with a crime?
Yeah, so let's say you're sued, you're acting within the scope of the Fourth Amendment, qualified immunity is implied, the city might pay out. Let's say qualified immunity is stripped and you have to pay out punitive damages. That is a way of being held accountable if you make a mistake. But again, being charged with murder for something you did in good faith, acting within the Fourth Amendment, it's completely out of line.
Your police department, like many, is under or what has been under in the past a federal consent decree. This is something, there's a lot of discussion about federal consent decrees, especially as we move forward into a new, more pro-police administration in Washington, D.C. talk about the Department of Justice and what they do sometimes to local law enforcement in a way that over controls them.
So a little bit different. The city of Columbus was under federal consent decree. The city of Columbus brought in the DOJ cops office to review policies. It wasn't the litigation a problem. They weren't controlling the Division of Police Columbus. They looked at our policies. They looked at our policies and they found that 99% of our policies were correct, that we were doing the right thing. We're an accredited agency, a CLIA accredited agency. And I used that in 2020 when the allegations was there was systemic racism within the Division of Police. Our elected mayor said there was racism in the Division of Police. CLIA is made up of PERF, it's made up of the Chief Association, and it's made up of Noble, right? Our Black law enforcement executives literally put a stamp saying you have the best policies and practices, the Division of Police. So when that report came back from the DOJ that our policies were correct, we did not have a pattern of systemic racism. We did not have a pattern of use of force. Instead of our mayor saying, hey, it was worth the money we spent to ensure, the mayor said, I'm disappointed with the findings, and he sent it back to reinvestigate. The DOJ came back again, and they had the same outcome. There was a couple policies that we could fix. Again, that's the reform part. Let's take what we're doing, do a little bit better. No racism, no pattern of corruption or use of force.
Cops are automatically said to be racist when we arrest or we have to use force against an individual of a different color. How did this get so bizarre?
It was created. It was created by a narrative. I'm not going to get political, but there was a leftist wing in this country who created the false narrative. 2020, I was at Broad and High Street. That's our main intersection next to the State House. Like many people, I watched a video of something that happened 500 miles away, and I was shocked, like everybody. Now, we've since found out even that story is not quite what we were led to believe. But I thought, okay, here I am. I'm a white officer. I took this job. I worked the majority of my career in an inner city community of color. Absolutely my community I'm dedicated to. But everybody's calling me a racist and throwing rocks and bottles at me. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to maybe see if I missed some things. I went back to school. I'm a lifelong learner. I went back to school and I did a program of Black Studies. And I learned a lot. I learned there are some things that I missed growing up that I wasn't taught. I realize the black eye law enforcement has to people of color in our history, but it's bigger than that. So when someone wants to talk racism or brutality, that's micro. I want to talk a macro scale. I want to talk about racism in education, in healthcare, in banking. We can acknowledge that so we know where we have to go to move forward. So I always push back when someone wants to talk simply racism, police department. I have never seen it. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's never happened in front of me. Me and you, Betsy, people like us, we would never tolerate that. It was such a false narrative.
As we move forward into 2025, after a really historic election, not just nationally but locally, one of the things we saw is these prosecutors. There were about 75 of them around the country that were brought in, that were propped up by George Soros and others specifically to prosecute police officers. About half of them are gone. They either quit, they got recalled, they got defeated. What do you think that says about how the American public views the criminal justice system as well as their own local law enforcement?
We overcorrected in 2020. We went so far one way. Luckily, the pendulum is starting to swing, come back. That's why this Coy decision was such a sock in the gut. These prosecutors ran on this notion of they're the chief social justice warrior. There is a time and place for social justice. Your prosecutor is your chief law enforcement officer. Their job is to take the worst of the worst people that we arrest and send them to prison where they belong. I think individuals saw when we put these woke rogue prosecutors in place, what happened to crime and murders? It spiked. The city of Columbus post 2020, we had over 200 murders. When I came on, we were at 70 murders. Now, if we hit 100, we're trying to celebrate like we're doing right. You and I know, and I'll just speak in the city of Columbus, 90% of our victims in the city of Columbus are people of color. 75% of our known suspects are people of color. In the city of Columbus, overwhelmingly, suspects commit crimes at a higher rate. Overwhelmingly, people of color do not commit crimes. And most people don't want to talk about this. So instead of blaming police and racism for the reason there's drive-by shootings in Columbus, we have to get to the root problem. And I can't find anybody from the Black clergy. I can't find a single politician, police chief, or sheriff to want to talk about that.
You know, and this is the thing. We have 32,000 identified street gangs in this country. And that's one of your biggest problems in Columbus is street gangs. And this has been going on since I was a rookie cop in 1980. What do you think we need to do to finally stop the scourge of street gangs?
Go back to proactive policing. I had a commander when I first came on. I worked with the gang unit, and he was a commander of color. And I remember he said, listen, if there's someone selling drugs, a gang member selling drugs in front of the store, and someone doesn't want to go in that store, he goes, I expect you to harass that person all day, every day, right? That's your job. He said the drug dealer or the gang member should see your cruiser and have a panic attack because he knows you're going to get out on him, right? But we were supported then. We had a Mayor Coleman at the time who came out publicly and said, point a gun at one of our officers, they will shoot you. Think of how great it is working with someone who's going to support you like that, as opposed to someone that says, fall to the temptation of pulling your trigger and we're going to send you to prison.
That is so well said. Brian Steele, where can folks follow you?
So I'm at Brian Steele _ or you can go to FOP9.org. That's our page.
Brian, we cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.